Hi, my name is Rachel Allen Everett, and I'm the creator of the Manderfield Devil, and you're watching Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We're joined today by another very talented creator in her own right. This is her first time talking about this particular comic, and she is a very talented artist and writer. I got through the entire comic itself. I love it. It's a very short read for those that are interested. But we're joined today by the ever-talented Rachel Allen Everett. How are you doing today?
Doing well, thanks, Kurt.
So welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming on. I want to talk about this comic because I love the art style. I love the writing. You definitely dive into the supernatural in essence in itself too, but we'll let you describe what is this book all about.
The Manderfield Devil is a noir murder mystery meets cautionary fantasy inspired by Hellboy and the Twilight Zone. It's about a hard-nosed detective Hogan who comes to an old Dust Bowl town in the panhandle of the U.S. to investigate some mysterious murders. And the town is very superstitious and believes that the murders were conducted by a devil. He comes to town and there's a little girl and her name is Leslie, and the town folk believe that she's been consorting with the devil. And this girl, geez, I don't know what to say without giving away certain aspects of the story.
Needless to say, it's a very interesting tale to be told as you read throughout the comic. That's for sure.
Thanks, yeah.
Without spoil. We kind of touched upon it early before we started here. You know, you said this was based off of a real tale. Is that right?
It was based off of a real place. I live in Utah. Driving through the state between Salt Lake and Moab is a town called Manderfield in the middle of nowhere. And me and my friends were just on a road trip one day, and we decided to stop off at this town that we'd never seen before and just see what it was all about. We turned off the road and we pulled up to the town. It was like 3 houses and a big old billboard that said, welcome to Manderfield. Actually, population 50, cows 500. And that just like turned into this silly conversation topic. Like we turned around, there was nothing else really to see in Manderfield. We got back on the road and that started us talking about just silly, ridiculous scenarios about like, wow, there's so many cows in Manderfield. What if they ran out of women in the town and they started having to like marry the cows? And so that turned into this weird like idea in my mind of minotaurs in this small town in the Dust Bowl. And it was super stupid and super weird, but that turned into this. That was the seed that planted the story.
Well, you have an interesting cast of characters, especially diving into the supernatural that you have too. What did you draw from to create these characters?
Leslie was inspired by femme fatale characters, and she was also inspired by old Rubber Hose animated characters like Betty Boop, but darker twist. She initially was an older lady and then got younger and younger as the story developed. I found a photo online of this little girl that had Leslie's haircut, and basically that inspired the look of the character. Detective Hogan was inspired by, I don't know, all of the do-gooder characters that the heroes that you hear about in old time radio shows. A really great example is Paladin in Have Gun Will Travel. Basically any noir detective. I wanted this character that didn't believe in the supernatural. Then there's Oasis, this witch character that you interact with later. Her inspiration came from ancient Egyptian deities and then also Native American myths and legends. And she's just kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different ideas pooled together.
And of course you have the religious aspect of the South and that type of era as well too, where a simple misunderstanding turns out to be something more sinister than necessary.
Yeah.
It's truly amazing. Like, I love the fact that I didn't know where the story was going to go. I just know the fact that you had a consistent flow with it. You had a great interaction with the characters, and that art style was truly beautiful. Like, I think you really nailed like that era there for sure. So I was blown away by it. How did you draw upon this art style?
It was a long road to get to this art style. I've been drawing for a very long time. My style used to hang out in more line-based and flat color work. It was more like Winsor McKay. Another one of my favorite artists is Jake Wyatt. I'm also really influenced by Mobius. But I started this Manderfield project because I also really loved Mike Mignola and another artist, Dean Ormston. He worked on Black Hammer. I really liked the use of heavy black shadows. I wanted to be able to implement that in my own work. And so I was in college and working on this project and wanted to just better my skills and diversify my art. And so I started to work on implementing those heavy, dark black shadows into the work. And then again, since this story took place in the 1930s, I also have always loved old 1930s rubber hose cartoons. And I wanted to tie that into the style that I was using. And so Leslie, in her character design, it's really more prominent. Her proportions are really wonky and cartoony with her big hands and her big head. And that's really drawing a lot on rubber hose cartoons. Like, there was so many other influences that came into play, but that's, as far as I was consciously aware of, that's what I was doing.
I think the fact that you stuck to the details of that era, especially the song at the end of that thing, you really drew out the musical styling of that time period. You drew out the clothing and all that other stuff. And I think that, if you continue with this type of series, maybe, every decade or so, you might draw upon a different tale of the time or something like that. I think you'd have a great collection of detective noir graphic novels. So
thank you.
Hopefully you decide to keep doing something like that.
Yeah, I hope so too. I really do place a lot of importance in the research stage of creating a comic and writing a story. I'm really particular about getting rich details in the story and drawing upon history and reference material in order to really breathe life into the story. And I also really love focusing on a set of themes and really committing to those themes. So for Manderfield, it was really tied into this old desert town and mines. And then so canaries played a role because canary in a coal mine, and then mixing in to it just this little bit of fantasy element. So trying to keep my references limited in order to have a more in-depth take on my reference material and really apply it to the creative process.
Besides themes, there was a lot of emotions: anger, sadness, fear. Obviously, were definitely a major emotions, at least that I saw from this particular book. What was the hardest scene to write in this particular book, though?
That's a good question. I think the hardest scene, the one that I kept coming back to, was the confrontation between Leslie and Oasis, the witch. Leslie comes to face Oasis, and I had to really carefully select Oasis's words to Leslie to make sure that the message was communicated clearly. As far as emotional impact, let's see, the emotional scenes, there were certain beats throughout the story that I really wanted to make sure resonated with people. I wanted Leslie's pent-up anger to really come across throughout. I wanted her to appear cool, calm, and collected when you first interact with her, and then to just watch it boil over throughout the comic. And with Detective Hogan, I wanted him to remain stoic, but also have these moments where, like, for example, he's out on the street and a bird flies in front of him right after he's like, I'll nab this crook and these people are crazy. And then the bird like flies over him and distracts his thinking. I wanted these constant moments where it's like, are you sure about that, Hogan? Like, are you really sure that you don't believe in this kind of stuff. I was trying to really weave in those kinds of feelings and thought processes without really saying much about them, mostly just showing it.
Language obviously is a very powerful tool to use when it comes to telling a story, but also when it comes to communicating your themes as well too. What was the first time that you learned that language had power?
Oof. Man, it had to be really early on, because all of the movies that I love and the stories that I love tend to have a really careful approach to the words that they use. It really influences and affects the story. For example, I grew up with Jane Austen stories and watching the Jane Austen movies. So like Pride and Prejudice, they use that Regency era jargon and language, and it breathes, it's so important. Like if they were just talking like us, using modern language, it would totally draw you out of the story. I feel like I don't know exactly when I realized that language was super important, but definitely going into Manderfield, I really wanted to try hard to make my language fit the era. I don't know how well I did, but I listened to a lot of old radio shows and tried to get the language down so that I could use that to draw the audience in more deeply into the story.
You did. Like, you've accomplished that. And especially for 37 pages. I mean, you've done an amazing job with it, though.
Thank you.
Obviously, when it comes to editing this particular book, though, what did you edit out?
Oh, so much. This story was so much longer. I whittled it down. There were probably 20 different versions where the story was completely different. For an example, like Hogan at one point was a cowboy, and at one point he fell in love with Leslie when she was an older character.
Ooh.
Hogan at one point was a cowboy, and he fell in love with Leslie when at one point she was much older. And in that story, Leslie was in love with Charles, the cursed boy. Anyway, so I've cut out a lot. I've changed it a lot. And then the story was also so much richer at one point. Let me think of some examples. I wanted to show more about Charles, the Leslie's brother. I wanted to show more about his story and how they interacted, because their relationship is a lot deeper and heartfelt, but also Leslie's really manipulative with her brother. So I pulled out a lot of that. And I also pulled out a lot of Leslie interacting with the town folk and really buttering them up to believe that it was the devil that committed those murders. And so lots of detail was pulled out. There was also some scenes where I went into more detail about how the gouges in the murdered people were supposed to be like devil's horns.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, lots of things had to be edited out in order to fit it into such a short space.
So why did you decide on 37 pages then, when you had so much more you could have offered with the comic? I'm not saying you didn't offer enough. I'm just saying, like, it sounds like you could have done a 50 or 60 pager.
Yeah. So that brings up the reason why I did Manderfield in the first place. I created Manderfield. Like I said, I was in college at the time. I was a junior when I came up with, when I really started to dive into the story. I was a junior in college, and I was gearing up for my capstone project. I was studying illustration, so I was already really neck deep in a lot of art projects. But I wanted to challenge myself to finish a story. I have this other story that I've been working on. It's called 13 Light Years Away, and it's a sci-fi story that I've been obsessed with since high school, and it's just never come to fruition because it's my baby. And I've always been touting myself as I want to make comics, and this is what I want to do, and have always felt that I have enough talent for it, but didn't really have much of a product to show for it. And I wanted to create a project for myself where I could finish a story. And I also wanted to limit my scope so that it would really force me to focus on the most important things in the story and in the artwork, and to just get it done. Like be realistic about it, and know that I'm so busy, but I can at least do 37 pages. So that's ultimately why it's as short as it is, just so that I finish the dang thing.
What's the most misunderstood aspect about being an illustrator?
Okay, I guess for the layman, for anybody just coming to understand what an illustrator does and is, like, whenever anybody asks me what I do, I say I'm an artist, but that's a really broad term. Specifically, I'm an illustrator, and what sets illustrators apart from artists is that we're storytellers. We're visual storytellers, whether it's a conceptual illustration or it's a narrative illustration. We're supposed to be storytellers. And I think one of the biggest misunderstood aspects of that is that it's not just like, people will say that, oh, you just came up with that out of your head. You just drew that on the paper and that just came from nowhere. So much thought and preparation goes into a drawing. For me, especially, like I said, the research phase is so important to me, coming up with these concepts and ideas and weaving them together before putting them onto the page, or as I put them onto the page, thinking about these references and influences and applying them. It's not effortless, I guess. And I think a lot of people think that because I'm an illustrator and because I love drawing, that it's easy for me, that it's a hobby or that it's a release, but it's more like a problem solving process than anything else.
Well, then from a creative perspective or process, I'm going to ask this. What is your kryptonite as an artist?
Too much time to do a project, I think. I am terrible at staying on top of deadlines when the deadline is flexible in any way, or if it's really far out. I need to limit myself. That's another reason why I shortened Manderfield so much, is to force myself to get the project finished. Setting those limitations for me just gets me to work so much harder and finish things. So yeah, my kryptonite is just being given way too much time to work on something, and then I focus way too much on making it perfect instead of finished, and that's a problem for me.
Have you ever tried the 24-hour comic book day?
Oh yeah. I have yet to actually officially do it in 24 hours. But I did recently do a 24-hour game jam, where I joined a small team and we put together a miniature pixel art game together. And we did that it was for the GMTK game jam. I think it was in August. That was fun, and that was really good because it forced me to get stuff done in a short amount of time.
I've never heard of that before.
Really? Yeah.
I've been a geek for a long time, but I've never actually heard of that. So Can you describe what the process was for that, or what exactly the name of the game was and all that?
Yeah. So the game is called Tethergeist, and we're actually developing it further into a full-fledged game right now. We're hoping to take that to Kickstarter later down the road, in a year or so, probably. Either way, it's a game that focuses on platform mechanics, and you have a little character that's tethered to their soul, and you can basically use your soul as this basically like slingshot thing to project yourself throughout the world. And so it's a puzzle game, and should really appeal to speedrunners. It's like Celeste, if you've heard of that one. Yeah, so it's a lot like that.
Do you prefer working solo or in a team then, from a creative perspective? Doesn't matter what the project is.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been asking myself that for a long time. Going through college, I was up against the decision of whether or not I wanted to do illustration for publishing, or if I wanted to go the route of being a concept artist for games and movies. And basically, one of the biggest differences between those two fields is that in publishing, you can work by yourself. You can take a lot more creative control. Of course, there are some exceptions depending on your art director, but oftentimes in publishing, the artist has freedom. And then in entertainment, it's, unless you like make it up the ladder to be an executive director or any sort of art director, like, you're going to be just a cog in a wheel. You're going to be working on a team with other people. there are pros and cons to both, in my opinion. For me as a creative person, I think it's probably pretty apparent that I'm really anal about the details and really anal about my vision. And when I have a creative vision, I want to execute it really perfectly and really particularly. Manderfield is a great example of that. And I can do that in publishing and in comics, especially. Like, you can flesh out a world and I have full creative control. I get to art direct everything. I get to decide how the characters look and who they are. It's just like, I get to control all the details. But in entertainment, like, I get to work with a team of individuals who have insights and strengths that I don't have, who can help me out where I'm lacking. And we can work and build together something that none of us could have done by ourselves. Like, I couldn't personally put together a video game by myself, or I couldn't personally make an animation by myself. So there are pros and cons to both, I think. I am personally going to like go and emphasize the publishing route for now. I'm focusing on comics right now, but I am totally interested and appreciate and value working on teams with other people too.
What drew you to the comic industry then?
Boy, a lot of things, but starting way early on, I've always been a storyteller since I was very, very little. I have videos of myself as a kid sitting behind the couch doing a little picture slideshow with drawings that I drew on little pieces of paper, and I was just flipping through them behind the couch and telling a story that was totally nonsensical, but I have like several videos of me doing that kind of a thing. And then I also have lots of little stapled together stories that I illustrated and wrote. Had my mom write down the words, but I'd tell her what to write. And so I've always been a storyteller, and it's always accompanied my artwork. Even though I wasn't really into comics super early on, I always loved illustrating along with my writing. I wasn't an avid reader at all. Like, I hated reading. It still takes a lot to get me to read. In junior high, there was this required mandatory reading time in one of my classes, and I had to pick a book from the back of the class, and my teacher had some comics back there. She had Jeff Smith's Bone, and I picked that up, and that was the first comic I ever read. And that really opened up my eyes to the idea that I could tell stories graphically like that. And then what really set the ball rolling, because for a long time I was really set through high school, and right after high school I was really set on animation as a career because I loved storytelling, and that's totally what animation is. But then I got an anthology, a little comic book anthology that was created by some alumni from my university. I went to Brigham Young University, and in this anthology there was a comic. It was a single page comic, and it was drawn by Jake Wyatt, and it's called Illuminate. And it's just this gorgeous, lavish world. You just dive into this Atlantis, like Mesoamerican type world with this magical element to it, where there's this goddess at this throne, and she gives the character a flame. And either way, it drew me into this world really. Before that, I was like, comics have to be action-based and adventure-based. But this comic was like looking at poetry to me. And I wanted to tell stories that were similar, that were engaging and world-building, and also just beautiful. And so that set me on the path more towards publishing and comics.
Do you like poetry?
I do like poetry. Yeah, I write some poetry every once in a while. I'm not like super literate with my poets, so don't ask me who's my favorite poet because I can't tell you, but I do like poetry.
Would you turn one of your poems into a graphic novel or a story?
I would, and I have actually. I took some of my poems and turned them into I have a couple poems that I turned into short little dinky comics that I posted on Instagram a while ago. And also that song that I wrote for Manderfield I would also consider that a poem in its own right, and into the comic. So I do anticipate that poetry will be implemented in many of my creative projects.
It's not a bad thing to have whatsoever. Not many people actually do it, so it works out well. Looking at this comic, the fact that you took the time and you've put this all together, what has been the reaction, especially with the multiple social media platforms that you've posted it on, to the comic and the story itself?
People have generally liked it a lot. I think there were moments when I was first putting the comic out that I was a little bit worried, because I realized like, oh shoot, this is actually really quite dark. And that was unusual for me. Like, a lot of people know me as more of a bright, happier kind of person. And so the other artwork that I was producing was for my 13 Light Years Away book, which was, that world is much more young adult, family friendly world that's a little bit more like Star Wars. And then along comes this comic pretty much out of the blue that's kind of creepy and darker. So I was worried that people would be off put by it. And some of my immediate peers are just like, whoa, that looks scary to me. Like, I don't know about that. So some people are a little bit uncomfortable about it, but generally the people that read it really appreciate it. It's been interesting to see how people interpret the story and who they think is the bad guy. And like, that's been really edifying to me to see how people react to the story and like say what they think it means. People really generally appreciate the mixture of the genres, the noir murder mystery meets cautionary fantasy vibe, and they really appreciate the attention to detail that I've put into the story, which I think is a win for me. That's what I was going for.
With all of those accolades and people guessing the characters and who's the good guy and who's the good person and who's the bad person, you're now taking this to Kickstarter, if I understand correctly. So that's amazing to see as well too. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I'm taking the book to Kickstarter. It's already published completely online, so you can read it online. You can actually even download a free PDF if you sign up for my newsletter. So it's completely free to read right now. I am launching a Kickstarter to fund printing costs. I want to put together a book that includes the comic, the whole 37 pages of the Manderfield Devil, and then also tack on some bonus content at the end. I'll add an artist afterward where I'll talk about the process of how I came up with the story, dive more into the influences and the characters and what the stories means to me. And then I also want to add a sketchbook where I go into the process of coming up with the visual aspect of the story. And at the end, I am having a couple of my friends draw pinup art for the story. That'll total like 60 pages of content in a little softcover book. And I'm planning to launch that on Kickstarter on October 20th. The goal is $5,000. And then if I reach my stretch goal, which is $7,500, then I can print the book in hardcover, and everybody who gets a book gets hardcover.
So there's the 60 pages that you originally wanted to get done.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
Good stuff. That's great to see. Is this your first Kickstarter?
It's actually my second Kickstarter. I did a Kickstarter right out of high school for a 0 issue introducing my 13 Light Years Away comic story. And it was only 16 pages, and I printed it as a floppy. Yeah, I distributed that at comic conventions afterwards. It was successful. It was funded over about 30%. It was successful, but it was a small campaign.
I was going to say a success is a success. So, take any win that you can get when it comes to crowdfunding campaigns and all that other stuff as well. Yeah. Everyone has one person that inspired them on the path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
Wow, one person. Geez, I can think of like 3.
Okay, fine. Let's go with 3.
Okay, I'll tell you about 3. Number 1 is Jake Parker. Jake Parker is a freelance illustrator. He's famous for creating Inktober, and he's also a comic book creator. He's very passionate about comics, and he created the Missile Mouse series, and he's also got a Skull Chaser that he's working on right now, and he also did a Rocket Raccoon series. He is one of my mentors, and I'm very lucky to be his friend. And he just really inspires me because he's so focused on and dedicated to getting projects done. His business model is exactly the business model I want to follow. And he inspires me mostly because of his mantra, finished, not perfect, which is something that I have to tell myself all the time when I'm creating products. His passion lies in finishing products and putting your work out there to inspire others. And I think that's so inspiring to me. So I love Jake Parker. Another one is Jeff Lemire. He's another person who I really look up to and admire. He's very big in the comics industry right now. He wrote comics like Essex County and Sweet Tooth, which is now a Netflix series, and you've probably heard of him. Yeah.
Here's a little side note on that. He's actually from my area.
Really? Really? Okay.
So I'm in Essex County. So.
Okay. I was actually wondering where you were based. So that's good to know. Wow. So do you know him?
No,
okay.
no, not personally, but his newest series, Fish Flies, is literally like a 4-month span of these bugs that only live for 2 days.
Oh,
and they cover everything. Ugh. And they smell. They're horrible.
Jeff's awesome because he also is prolific and creates so many stories, but he also focuses on really personal stories. He accesses a really emotional aspect that for me is so poetic, and for me is one of the driving reasons behind why I want to be making comics. So I really love Jeff Lemire, big hero of mine. And then number 3 I've already mentioned is Jake Wyatt. He's known for his comic Necropolis that's been in the works for a while, and it's a beautiful, beautiful world that he's establishing. He is very busy, and comics aren't his main focus, but that world and that his approach to storytelling has always been much more based in, again, that poetic and world focused storytelling that I really love and appreciate. So those are my 3 biggest heroes, and who really inspired me to approach comics.
From a professional standpoint, you've created this comic. You've had successful Kickstarter campaigns. You're going to use this as a basis for another amazing Kickstarter. I'm sure it'll be fully funded as well too. And you've had wonderful, not only mentors, but you've also had wonderful reaction to those that read the comic itself. So from a professional standpoint, you are successful, but do you consider yourself personally successful?
Ooh. I think that's a question I won't be able to really fully answer until the end of my life. But I think that I am successful so long as I continue creating. If I ever stop producing, I feel like that's when I need to reevaluate. And it's not that I need to be completing projects all the time. I mean, of course, I have to give myself some space. I don't need to be producing all the time, and I don't have to be finishing products all the time. But as long as I'm just creating, my favorite memories of my life, and I think every artist and creator can relate to this, is when I was a kid and on those summer vacations when I could just wake up every day and decide what I was going to create and just make it in that one day with my friends. We'd go out and film movies, or we'd go into the craft room and create random creatures and objects and things, or I'd draw whatever story I wanted to draw, living that creative life that was very childlike and innocent, and not caring about what the world thought, not caring about art from a commercial standpoint, but still always creating for the sake of creating. I feel like that's what success looks like for me. And I just always want to have that spark of creativity in my life, always wanting to return to that childlike nature of myself, back when I could just make whatever the heck I wanted and didn't care what other people thought. Like, that's what success really looks like to me.
The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
So a great example of failure for me is that 13 Light Years Away story that I've been developing for a long time. And it's not failed, like it's not over. I still fully intend on creating it and bringing it to life. And that's been my ongoing project forever. The failure lies in that I still haven't made it yet. And I always deal with that pressure that I haven't created this thing that I promised to the world a long time ago, to the whole world, because the whole world's watching me. Just kidding, they're not, but still sometimes it feels that way when I make these promises, where I post like, yeah, 2017, here it comes, like chapter 1, it's on its way, and then it never happens. So failing to follow through is something that I really struggle with. I've had to give myself the space to be able to basically fail, because I think I'm a perfectionist. I think a lot of creative people are, and I oftentimes think that I need to be on top of my game all the time, and I like giving myself the permission to not be perfect. Again, going back to Jake Parker's mantra, finish not perfect. That's one of the biggest ways that I can deal with failure. Another one of the biggest ways that I deal with failure is viewing it as a learning experience. And I think this applies to life in general, like just acknowledging that your failures don't define you, but it's how you respond to them and how you decide to grow and learn and progress past them. And you can't learn and grow without failure. You just can't. That's not how it works. You have to come across roadblocks in your life. You have to come across days where you don't feel like drawing, or you don't feel like creating at all, or where you make a total mistake and don't know exactly how to fix it. You have to come up across those roadblocks in order to enter that creative problem solving mode where you start to figure out how to get over that hurdle. And I think that happens in day-to-day life. That happens even like down into the level of just working on a story, recognizing that like where something isn't working in a narrative, being able to recognize that quote unquote failure and being able to problem solve around it and figure out where it fits or figure out whether or not you need to discard it. So I view it as problem solving, creative problem solving, to get your way out of failure and beyond failure, and learning how to work with it.
The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own way, whether it comes from the Manderfield Devil or whether it comes from any other works you decide to create in the future or other stuff you've created already in the past. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
I love this question because that's something that I think about a lot. One of the other marks of success for me is knowing that I've left an impact on the world in some positive way. And again, that's hard to measure, and I don't know that I'll ever be able to see that. And if I do, it'd probably be towards the end of my life. But I think that you just need to go into your projects with an authentic intent to inspire and to uplift and to motivate. And I think that comes from authenticity and authentically telling your stories. Jeff Lemire is another great example of being authentic about your storytelling. And he's grown this adoring fan base because of his authenticity, and has inspired people like me to create more comics because of his authenticity. I think that if you're looking to be successful and if you're looking to inspire others, create the work that you want to see in the world. That's a Jake Wyatt reference, pulling all my mentors into this. But create the work that you want to see in the world and finish things, like what Jake Parker always says, is just finish projects so that the world can see them, so that they can appreciate them. So that's be authentic in your storytelling, create the work that you want to see in the world, and finish not perfect, finish your projects, put things out there.
Well, I do hate to say it, Rachel, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You know, you made it through your first interview about this particular comic, and I want to thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Kurt. I'm glad that we were able to discuss this, and I hope that my concise words were also insightful and helpful.
You did wonderfully, truly. But before I let you go and before I close out the show, where can we find you and how can we support you on social media and the internet?
The best way that you can support me is by signing up for my newsletter. You can, hopefully there will be a link in the video. They go sign up for my newsletter and you can download a free PDF copy of the Manderfield Devil and you can read it if you want. But my newsletter is where I send out a monthly letter, and I just explain some of my process and go into what inspires me to create, and then update you about what's going on in my career. And that's where you'll be the first to find out when the Kickstarter has launched and when it will launch. So you can support me on the Kickstarter, which brings me to the second thing. If you can support me on my Kickstarter when it does launch, it's launching October 20th, 2021. And so if you can support me there, the book will be only $15 if you go and support it the first day that it launches. Lastly, you can follow me on Instagram. It's ray.allen.art. And then you can also look up my website at rayallenart.com. And yeah, those are the best places to find me.
Like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank Rachel for coming on the show. I do greatly appreciate not only her work, but her time for doing this interview. And go support her on her various Instagram. Support her Kickstarter campaign coming out October 20th as well, too. And tune into this interview and thousands of others on our website, tgtmedia.com, or twogeekstalking.com. That's the word two, not the number two. And of course, our YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/TGT Media. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell, and it's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking. Hey, all, Kurt Sasso here from Two Geeks Talking. If you like this video and these quick clips here, make sure you take a look at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe as well. Hit the bell to make sure you get notifications, of course, from videos like this here. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching over the years, and keep listening and watching for new and exciting interviews with talented and creative people in the entertainment industry. I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. Thank you so much.